Get started. So today's topic is process monitoring, and specifically, um, what is process monitoring? So if you're one of our installers out there, if you've not really heard this term or haven't run into it before, we'll give you a little bit of some examples and what that looks like. And then the concerns and solutions for process monitoring. So things like latency, which is, how live is the video from what you're actually seeing it. Some of the image quality things and the hazardous environments that these cameras are usually in or around. And then we'll talk about kind of bring it together in terms of talking about all these solutions, and then we're going to bring it together in sort of a small success story where we talk about those products. So um, before we get too deep into things, just if you haven't not familiar with SEW, we're a value-driven company with end-to-end security solutions. So, whether it's process monitoring or traditional security requirements, offer free consultations, install and self-install options, along with dealer programs and world-class US-based support. That's all included with any purchase. So first topic is what is process monitoring? So process monitoring is essentially utilizing video to improve your operations. And this is outside of our traditional security concerns of, vandalism, intrusion, and everything like that. This is getting into manufacturing, different types of process monitoring, and it really becomes basically your eyes for your operation is another way of looking at it. Um, and this is also going to improve your safety and efficiency. So when we have cameras in areas, they don't need to be humans don't need to go in those areas to see things or direct things. The cameras can be there and improve your safety so employees aren't in hazardous areas. Um, Another huge thing about process monitoring is it also reduces the line or machine downtime. Anytime you have machine downtime or line downtime, can obviously be devastating, can push back orders and have a big ripple effect. So having cameras there is something that can really improve that process. So I want to give you a quick example of one that's simple and easier to understand is one of our clients is a wood mulching company, and they have a conveyor belt that the logs and the spare wood and the trunks and everything like that are put in there. And foreign objects, whether that's like a rock or something else that shouldn't be in there, can disrupt and damage equipment. So this person will sit there on that line and they have very difficult to track that kind of stuff while things are moving, right? And I mean, while the claw is grabbing that wood, it's difficult to see. So what they did is we installed cameras along the conveyor belt, and utilizing high-speed shutter cameras and zoom cameras, we allow that operator to safely watch for any foreign objects in that area. So in the event that they do see one, he can hit that stop button before it actually reaches the mulcher and preventing serious damage. So that's an example of production monitoring system there. So what are some of the concerns and what are the solutions to it when it comes to production monitoring? The number one concern that we typically run into is latency. And so if you're not familiar with latency, it's basically the delay that you're seeing on the video compared to the real world. So if you lift your hand up on the video, is it instantaneous or is there a slight delay? And even a moderate delay in the video when you're really operating your these cameras, your eyes into the operation can be a non-starter. And some solutions out there, just by the nature of specifically when you think of like cloud first infrastructure, they're going to have potentially seconds of latency in that. Which any seconds of latency is going to make real-time operation very, very difficult or potentially even impossible. So just to clarify, our latency in depending on the solution you're looking at here is definitely measured in milliseconds, and usually it's about as instantaneous as you can get with the video surveillance system. So, but what actually causes that latency? So depending on what the setup is looking like, it could be caused by, the network, depending on how everything's configured, how the computer is potentially even connected to that network. Is it on Wi-Fi? Is it wired, etc. Whether you're local there at the end site, or if you're remote, the further away you are from the site, the more you're probably going to get some latency there. And then it goes into like the kind of system you have, the how good is the software at processing and how quick is it? Is it a cloud first system where you're having to go through the cloud first and it's sort of doing a big loop for you, so there's a natural delay of a couple seconds there. And then the other issue with latency is typically if you have lower end equipment, that's not really a priority for some of that. And then the more complicated cameras out there too. So if you got ones that sort of have like, they split together and turn multiple cameras into one view, or potentially, fisheye, stuff like that, if you're de-warping them, that could introduce a little bit of latency there too. So what's kind of the solution to potentially any delay? Well, one of the best ways of dealing with the latency is to use an NVR and to have a direct connection. And so what we mean by that is you get your NVR, you plug the cameras into the back of it, and then you use the HDMI output on the NVR to get you the least amount of latency possible. So this isn't, when that video goes into that monitor, it doesn't need to traverse a network. It's a very direct connection, so there's very little to no latency with this, almost immeasurable in a lot of cases. So, and this is a very simple solution too. So this doesn't involve more complicated equipment or having to have a PC. So the benefits of this, another major benefit of this is you don't need a PC, so you don't need to go and purchase a computer to go along with this. And then the other major benefit too is that there's no user input required for this. So when you plug that monitor up and you configure the view, that person doesn't have to log into their computer. They don't need to deal with Windows or an update or anything like that. They just have complete focus on the production monitoring aspect. And as I mentioned, this is the least amount of latency possible when it comes to cameras, and it's going to be measured in like the low milliseconds. Another option too is a decoder. So these are devices that, way I usually describe them for people who have never seen before, is they're, hardware device that has a bunch of HDMI connections on it so that you can connect it to multiple displays. And the nice thing about this is that you can set this up to whatever views you want, and it's all controlled centrally through software. So again, that user who comes in that morning to do the operation shifts, he doesn't have to sit there and figure out what cameras do I want to view or what cameras do they need to look at first. He just walks in and the cameras are always there 24/7, doesn't need to do anything to actually get them. And again, this can be set up depending on how you can set this up, can be as low latency as an NVR actually. So another really good solution, and definitely much less than most PC software solutions as well. And here's a bigger image of what that decoder looks like here. So you can see we have multiple HDMI outputs that can be sent to monitors just like this. And so you can see each of these monitors can have a different view. So you can have a larger grid over here, a single camera, a four grid, whatever the operations requires there. The benefits of the decoder too is, again, as I mentioned, no user interaction is required, nothing like that. There's no changing views or anything like that. There's nothing that can be messed up in another way of putting it. Again, no PC required here, so you can just have that HDMI on the monitor there. So one less thing to have to manage, one less thing to have to purchase and worry about. And then the other thing that to briefly touch on too is we go back to that main image here. You'll see we also have two HDMI inputs there, and those are kind of, most people go, "Whoa, what's that for?" And so that allows you to actually plug in an HDMI device. So whether that's maybe some information from a computer or some kind of other service that gives data on the production line, you can actually put that into the decoder and then have that distributed in the live view as like a camera grid, so to speak. So if you look over here, you'll see that we've sort of got some production information here on this left corner, and then it's fed around by the cameras. So, if somebody needs to be able to see some information on those decoders, it's a really, really good option too. And you can distribute that to, in this case, we have ones that can do six. This one's a 6 HDMI decoder. We have ones that can do 12. And so you could distribute that one video feed to 12 different stations if you need to. So, a little complicated, but definitely let us know and we can work that through and understand how to best get that information to your operators. And as I go through this, you might be thinking NVRs and the decoders sound really great, but what if I can't put the decoders and the NVR that close? What if they're in an IDF or an MDF that's further away? Obviously HDMI has some form of limits. I'm not sure if there's actually an official one actually, but it does get more complicated after around 50 feet or so. So the distance is a big concern, but we have solutions for that as well. So HDMI extenders allow you to run HDMI over Cat5e or Cat6 cable or Ethernet cable. So this would allow you to simply run an Ethernet cable from the NVR or the decoder to the monitor wherever it's located. Ours can do around up to 250 feet. There are variations that can go much further. So if you get that from somebody else, it's a very universal thing. It's just standard HDMI, so it's not a problem. And ours even carries USB control. So, one of the things people may want to have to go look on playback, or they may want to control a PTZ or anything like that they're going to want to have a mouse control to it. So this actually will allow you to control the mouse even from up to 250 feet away as well. And this is sort of what it looks like here. So, we go from the NVR, we plug in the HDMI into it, we plug power on one side with our particular one, and then on the back of that same device, we've got the Ethernet connector on there. That goes to the other receiver on the other side where the monitor would be. And then, you can see we got mouse and control and everything. And then we just simply plug the HDMI side into the display. We actually don't need power on both sides. So that kind of simplifies the rollout as well. So these are really awesome devices that help us extend that same live view experience that you get with the decoders and the NVR across facilities. And these don't really add any latency whatsoever or any image quality difference either. So that's another big plus of them on the production monitoring side. So HDMI extenders can be purchased from us. We do have an option from SEW if you're looking for more of like a turnkey option. But you can also get, again, HDMI is a universal thing. Our HDMI is exactly the same as the HDMI in other devices. So if you have a source for these, you can definitely use them with our equipment. And another advantage of this too is that, a lot of these, we're going to hit on the hazardous environment element of this, but a lot of these locations have a lot of things flying in the air, and whether that's dust or metal slices and everything like that. And so if the NVR is kind of there near the production line where the monitor is, that tends to suck in dust and the fans and everything like that. So that's a concern for people. And this just allows you to maybe keep it in that IDF or the MDF that you have already set up without having to purchase more protective equipment to like a enclosures and stuff like that. And the monitor can still stay right there near the action. So another topic, to kind of sum up a little bit of what I've talked about so far is that, NVR direct or decoders through the HDMI are kind of our best solutions for limiting and avoiding latency. But sometimes there are situations where, you're not in that scenario where maybe it's beyond the HDMI connection, or, you just already have a PC there and it's already had a PC solution. What does that kind of look like? Well, we do offer PC and Mac software. It's called SW View Station. We've got a couple of videos there too if you want to learn a little bit more about its feature set, as well as a webinar we did in the past on it. So we can certainly send those links over if you want to learn more. You can also reach out to us. We'll do a demo for you if you'd like, and go over it and how this could work in your applications. But this allows you to manage multiple NVRs or multiple sites. So it's very helpful for like central management and monitoring. So if you have a control tower or a control area where, they're sort of monitoring the numbers and what's going on, and they need to bring up a camera system very quickly, this software is great for that, especially if you're in a situation where you've got a lot of different production areas. And now this is not our first recommendation in most cases for direct process monitor. So that person who's in the control cab controlling everything, I'm not typically going to recommend to do a software solution with it, because anytime it goes to the network, anytime you're using a computer, there's going to be an additional latency element just by the nature of it. Um, and um, that being said, view station, when you are, depending on what you're looking at, the network, everything like that, if everything's good with it, it still can be measured in milliseconds. So your control tower, everything like that, it's not going to be sitting there on a massive delay or anything. So it's still a good solution for that. Another thing with ViewStation that, and this goes with any software that you run on a computer, is that there's user input typically required, right? They've got to run the software, they've got Windows there. All of a sudden they're sitting there trying to look at it, and there's a Windows update that's going to force you to reboot and all that kind of fun stuff that comes with it. So training may be necessary as you get people on this. So that's why it's another situation where it's really good for the manager and less great for the operator who needs to focus on that operation side. The manager, if they lose, view of the cameras because they're looking at Chrome or something like that, not as big of a deal as if the operator is doing that. So again, director to coder is definitely better for the operator. I did want to mention this is kind of a lot of stuff going on. I mentioned probably a lot of tech terms, and depending on the audience here, you might be thinking like, oh, this is a lot to consider. I do want to mention that this process monitoring always presents some form of unique challenges, and that's sort of what we're here for. That's what our security experts are there for. You can give us a call, get a free consultation. We'll kind of walk you through, the whether how are we going to get the HDMI over there? Where can we place the NVRs? All that kind of stuff is going to be part of that solution with us. And this is an area we do actually very frequently. People tend to get our traditional security products, and then they look at their production line and they go like, man, this is something we could really improve with these cameras. The image quality and the features and the lack of latency is a big deal for them, and they want to kind of enhance their production line. Will usually come in after that and then do that as well. So this is an area we do very, very frequently. So we're definitely experts in this. Concern number two, we kind of just talked about latency, is the actual image quality as well. So image quality, when we talk about traditional security, is very grounded in the resolution. How far am I going to be able to see somebody's face? What clarity are they going to have? What's the angle? Am I going to see their directly on their face or more at the top of the heads? Can I see license plates? All this kind of stuff. And that a lot of that's resolution on that scenario, but with production monitoring, there's a little bit of a different concerns with this. One of the biggest ones is clarity on fast moving objects. So if you have a conveyor belt and the objects are moving very quickly on it, are they going to be clear? And they want it to be, obviously with production monitoring, live view is the key here. So, obviously maybe going back and doing the playback and be able to see maybe what happened and wrong is obviously still very important for some people, but being able to actually see the live view clearly and make it actionable is the key with production monitoring. And then also clear of any debris, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So motion clarity, this is probably the number one concern for a lot of people, and usually the number one complaint that we have when people are looking to go to us to replace their production monitoring camera system. And fast moving items need that clarity. And the way this works is two different settings and two different features on a camera. There's frames per second, which just basically determines how many images in a second of video is there in that video. So to put that in perspective, if you have any film buffs out there, it's 24 frames per second for most Hollywood movies. But for production monitoring and fast moving things, you really want to make sure that video is smooth on the live view, especially because the person has to react to what's going on in that operation. So we have cameras that can do 60 frames a second, which definitely makes that action much more smooth as you're looking at it. Now, frames per second is often, people tend to think that frames per second is what determines how clear the motion is, and that's actually not entirely the case. Shutter speed actually plays a far greater role in how clear those objects are going to be across that line. And so shutter speeds are basically how much light is let in and how much motion is let in. And you can have something that looks very clear, it's a high shutter speed, and it's 15 frames per second. So I got a video here. And this is going to give you an example of what shutter speed looks like. So on the left over here, we've got the 1/30 shutter speed, and then we have the faster 1/4000 shutter speed. And you'll be able to see the difference very clearly here. 1/30 is a very typical regular security camera shutter speed. That's sometimes a lot of them out of the box are set to that. So, and you'll notice with this that as I pause it here, that on the left here, we've got absolutely no way of reading what's on this. And then over here, when we pause it, it's completely frozen and clear in action. And even as it's moving, I'm going to go back here a little bit so we can see a little bit more. We can still read that test there on the right. And so if we kind of position this into the production monitoring world, this is obviously a wheel that's spinning and everything like that, but you've got conveyor belts, you've got other things that are moving very quickly, and you want to be able to see those things very clearly. Shutter speed is going to be one of the keys for it. So another thing about shutter speed too is that the faster the shutter speed, so 1/4000 is obviously much faster. We saw that the clarity was much better on that. But as a consequence, it lets in less light. So it's important that in these situations where you do have very fast moving things, and that's a priority to be able to see them very clearly, that you either have strong lighting in the area, or you have cameras that have low light capabilities, or honestly both would be kind of preferable. So, if you have dimmer areas and everything like that, you may need to lower it down. Obviously, there's a lot of options in between from 1/30 to 1/4000, but we can make those tweaks with you and make sure that we're making that balance between clarity and also making sure the image isn't too dark with noise in it and everything like that too. So that's part of the expertise with us. If you need to go through things and be able to see what you want to do with it and everything, then we're there to help with that. Another major aspect of production monitoring when it comes to the image quality isn't necessarily the image quality at all. Actually, it's kind of like what the camera is actually looking at, and specifically what maybe the camera is not even looking at. So when you're looking at a production monitoring, you want those details on it. And sometimes, again, resolution can get you details, but resolution is a lot less appreciable on live view than it is on playback. So what you really want to do for production monitoring is, instead of relying entirely on resolution to get that image quality, what you really want to require is optical zoom. And so when you think about a wide angle when we're looking at production monitoring, unless it's covering the entire area, can be a little bit of a waste. So let me show you a video here in just a second. But optical zoom, and you can see it over here on the right, I should mention too, what that looks like. It physically zooms in on the area. So that way it's focused there. So the operator is able to get less distractions and be able to focus on the area that matters. So a lot of times this is also a result of like having less grids. So if your operator sitting there on a monitor with 16 cameras, naturally those 16 cameras are much smaller than having a grid with 4. And some of our setups actually only use one monitor. So they'll have one camera per monitor, and they have 8 monitors up there in the front. And so depending on what the operator needs and how important that video is, or obviously we can kind of do any solution that you want in that situation. But here's this video I mentioned. So this is the same spinning wheel, and in this case it's zoomed out, and we're only looking at one camera. So obviously you guys are through Zoom and everything like that, so it may not be as clear for you as it is for me. But I can very clearly read the test here, even as it's operating and everything like that. But then what happens if I have 4 cameras here? So this is the same video, but now it's with 4 cameras, and now that, just by the nature of it getting smaller, is much less legible now. The next video is using optical zoom to make it bigger. So yeah, I could read it on the previous one on a single camera grid, but look at this 4 camera grid. I'm still able to read that much better because we did optical zoom in that situation. So this allows it to utilize the space. If you look back at what we had on the first thing here, we've got a lot of area here that's essentially what I would be calling wasted space in like a production monitoring area. So if I only care about this wheel here, I don't care about everything that's left and right and up and down. So when I zoom in and I kind of get um, I focus in the area I actually care about, then it's a lot easier to do a 4 camera grid, for example. Whereas before, it's almost impossible to keep track of that as an operator. And then the last one is one that's very zoomed in here, just to kind of show you what that would look like there too, in case it's a very fine detail. And you can see as it's zoomed in, even on the 4 grid, it's very legible that we're saying test there. So just a quick product recommendation for highlight, I should say. One of our cameras is called the Archer 2.0 V2. This is a low light camera. It's typically used for 2 scenarios, either long range because it's got a very big zoom, 10x zoom lens, or for production monitoring. And um, because it has that low light sensor, we can kind of push that shutter speed a little bit faster. It's got 60 frames per second, which is going to make that video very smooth and actionable to the live operator. And then again, that 10x zoom allows you to either zoom in from further away for positioning the camera away from the production for um, hazard reasons, which we'll cover here in just a second, or even if you need to zoom in because the details are very small. So definitely one I would recommend in terms of as a starting point. Some cameras we're not going to need that zoom, so definitely reach out to one of our experts who can walk you through all of our options for this. And speaking of concern number 3, this is the hazardous environments, the debris, the heat, all the other dangers that come with some production monitoring situations. Um, so the debris, the high heat, that's an obvious one. Some of these are in hotter areas and everything like that. But one of the other lesser considered concerns is like the debris. So that could be like grime from the production, grease that flows in the air from the machines, dust, sawdust, dirt, metal scraps, etc. And then of course even fire, sparks, and more when it comes to some manufacturing facilities. So how do you kind of avoid that? Obviously, like getting grease, getting grime on the camera is going to affect the image quality. It's going to, build up on the lens and things are going to be less clear. Um, so how do you actually avoid that? Well, let's go back to what we just talked about, which was the optical zoom, right? If we can place the camera further away, and this isn't always the option we have, this is where getting into each individual application is a little different, but in some cases, a lot of cases, we can place that camera just a little bit further away and use that optical zoom to be able to zoom in on the actual conveyor belt or whatever area we need to look at. Um, and so that way, as the debris are flying in the air, they're sort of out of the major debris area. They're out of the heat area, etc. So that's another major advantage of optical zoom when it comes to video surveillance cameras on this. The other part of it too is that even at distances, depending on, and you may not be able to get as far as you want to from some of the cameras just based on things that potentially could be blocking it or the angles and where you can even physically mount cameras. Even at distances, sometimes that stuff can accumulate, right? So I know a lot of our production ones that their big task for them is cleaning it on a very regular interval. So going through and making sure that all the cameras look clear, and if there's any kind of it doesn't look quite as clear as it used to, or maybe it's obviously it's got something on the lens to go ahead and clean it. And one of the things I would recommend with cleaning it, and I know we have some resources as well to go more detail into this, but depending on what you have in the air, right? So I know we have some of them that have metal swarf as those little kind of scrap ones we see here in the corner, and those can kind of eventually just build up on the camera. And so one of the things that we've recommended that they do is when they go to clean it, grab a compressed air thing, blow that camera so that there's none of that metal swarf on the actual camera before they actually go and use a microfiber cloth or anything like that. We also recommend using like distilled water to make sure there's nothing on there because metal can obviously scratch things. It can scratch the lens. So if you're grabbing that microfiber cloth and you're pushing that metal swarf into the actual lens, you could scratch it, which could impact the image quality and stuff like that. So cleaning is obviously a very big part of this, and carefully cleaning it and making sure that we're not also damaging any equipment is also another key part of it. And then other side too is temperatures. So every camera out there has some form of temperature rating. And it's usually starting with a low one. How low can it get? So if you're in like a cold production area or even like a freezer situation, how low is that camera going to be able to operate and still provide usable image? And then the other side of that is a high temperature. How high can that get without actually damaging the camera? So a couple things about the high and low temperatures. A low temperature, so in the event of, say, the Archer camera I mentioned earlier, that rating is -40 Fahrenheit to 140 Fahrenheit. So the low temperature, if this goes to say -45, what that basically tells you is after -40, there's no guarantees of operation. So that could mean that the camera still works, but it starts to skip out and stuff. Um, but it doesn't damage the camera permanently when you're under -40. Once it gets back to temperature, once it gets back to -40 and above, it's going to work just as it did before. Now, on the flip side, the high temperature, if you're looking at 140 Fahrenheit, what that means is if you go to 150 Fahrenheit, there's a chance that that could actually permanently damage the camera in some form or fashion. So that means it's very important to make sure that the camera you're placing in an area is number one, has a temperature rating for the production that you have, but then also when we're looking at placing these cameras, we got to kind of look at the production line and figure out, okay, where is the heat coming from? Where is it rising to? And how can we avoid, that heat directly impacting the cameras? So obviously it goes back to our zoom conversation. If we can place it a little bit further, the further away, the less heat it's going to directly be affected by. So if we can place the camera away from it, that's going to provide us a much better solution there. So the last part of this presentation here is kind of bringing it together into a real world example. So one of the other ones we've got is among many of them is a lumber mill that delivers over 200 million board feet, excuse me, of lumber per year, which is a lot. And they have two main cab operations, and they have a debarker and a saw line, and then also a control tower where they need video as part of their operations. So the cab operators, this is a 400-foot line. So that, this thing is all happening up to 400 feet away from the operator who's at the very start of it. And the all the operations of that debarker line are entirely relying on the camera feeds. There's no humans on that line. There's nobody there to sort of see things as they go into the conveyor belt and down the line. So that operator is relying 100% on that video to be delivered to him in a clear, zero latency, as much as possible, zero latency operations, because in this case, the cameras are his eyes in that operation. So the solution we went with in this particular case was the NVR being housed in the cab, and we were utilizing both the HDMI and VGA connections off our NVR. So we have two monitors there, and he had different sets of cameras. So we had four on one, four on the other, and the operator also had a mouse to zoom in any cameras if he needed to, or if he wanted to move things around, he had that freedom. And then throughout this production line, we had various models. We had some of the ones with the zoom lens, like the Archer. We had some that were fixed because they're looking at a wider area in that particular situation. So we looked at the production line, how things move in, where things got faster, where things got, were a little slower, and we didn't need the high shutter speed, and we made sure it was exactly what that operator needed and that he was getting the image quality that he needed to perform his job. And then on top of that, so he's got a direct no network. It's going right through the NVR. But at the same time, the control tower also needed the video as well. So, they're in there and they're reading the numbers and stuff. And if they see something kind of drop, or they see something that might be concerning when it comes to some of the numbers and the machinery that they're monitoring in there, they can easily bring up that camera system through the software on ViewStation. And so that is the control room where they can just look at it. They have a large TV in that area where ViewStation's operating, and if there's kind of an alarm or something that just seems a little unusual, they can easily bring that one up if they don't already have it up. And that includes both the the debarker and then the other line over there too. So because they got multiple lines they have to monitor, being able to view both of them from view station is a really good benefit, especially because the control room is actually in another part of the facility further away from both of those lines, so they can do that through their network. Um, and to kind of like wrap that up, cameras are absolutely critical to this lumber mill's operation. And we spent a lot of time planning, making sure that we understood their needs, that we knew what the operator was expecting, what the control towers was expecting, and really figured out the best way of delivering that to all of them within both, their operation demands, but also the budget demands too. Um, and that, this production line was also part of a traditional security system as well, where, if they ever need intrusion or just to be able to kind of monitor what happened on the camera or safety reasons and everything like that, they also have that same setup through the software. All of that's kind of universal, so they can use that on all the devices they have from their computers, but also smartphones, etc., to be able to kind of monitor things from anywhere. So, um, that being said, that's kind of the presentation there. I can open up the floor here for any kind of Q&As or um, questions about anything we talked about or anything that you guys want to know.
Yeah,
And go ahead.
oh, no worries. And just a reminder, we're going to shoot off the recording and then links to things we discussed today as well. You can always reply to that or contact your rep at SCW if you have any questions. But that will come right after we're finished here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's basically what I was gonna say is, if you have further questions or you want something that's, takes a little bit more time than a Q&A on a webinar, certainly reach out to us. We'll make sure you get in touch with an expert who can make sure we're recommending the best solution for you.